Please could you state your name?
Kenneth Leo Bourgeois, Bourgeois.
And your date of birth?
13 December 1929.
And the wars you served in?
Korea and Vietnam.
And your branch of service?
United States Marine Corps.
And your rank, and if this was the highest rank you achieved?
Major.
My name is Cara Gehring, and today is Wednesday the 5th of August 2009. This interview is taking place at Overton Brooks VA Medical Center in Shreveport, Louisiana, for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. I'm a volunteer at the Veterans Medical Center. Major Bourgeois, thank you for agreeing to be interviewed for the Veterans History Project.
You're welcome.
Please could you start by telling me when and where you enlisted in the Marine Corps?
I enlisted on 4 February 1947 at the U.S. Courthouse, a custom house in New Orleans, Louisiana.
And why did you decide to enlist?
I had always wanted to serve. I had all my brothers serving and lots of friends, and I just thought it was a thing to do.
Okay. And is there a reason you picked the Marine Corps over other branches of service?
Yes, we had a Marine Corps unit in the city of New Orleans, the 10th Battalion, 4th Marine Division. And I had some friends that were in that organization, so it was easy for me to select.
Had you considered any of the other branches?
No, I had brothers in the Navy, and the Air Force, or the old Army Air Corps, and the Coast Guard. Mm-hmm. And I had relatives who had served in Marine Corps Aviation and also Army. Our history in the family had lots of military background.
But you were the first to serve in the Marine Corps? First
to serve in the Marine Corps.
And did you share experiences with your brothers? Does it seem like you had very different experiences in the different branches?
I think they experienced just about the same thing we did.
And do you recall your first days of service?
Yes, I did. When I enlisted in the Marine Corps, it was in the Marine Corps Reserve, and most of the training was done in the city of New Orleans, and then 2 weeks out of every year we would go into North Carolina or Virginia or to California for additional training. And the training consisted mostly of learning how to read a map, how to use weapons, drill, discipline, history of the Marine Corps, and it was quite an experience.
And can you tell me a little bit more about the early training that you received?
Well, the early training was mostly physical, learning how to drill, how to accept orders, how to read maps, learn to interact with the officers and the staff non-commissioned officers. And what was good about this, we had a number of members in that unit had served in World War II. So then you had all these young kids coming in, learning how to perform as a Marine, and you had good role models.
And how did you find the physical training?
It was hard. But everybody doing it at the same time, it got better. And that's about it.
And what do you think was that? What do you remember is the hardest part of the training?
The hardest part was the weather. Sometimes New Orleans is very hot and humid, and North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia was even worse. So learning to get acclimatized to the weather and that was the hardest part for me, I think.
And do you remember what your accommodation was like when in those early days?
Yes, at Camp Lejeune we had Quonset huts, and also had barracks over on the main side of the base. They had a facility over there called Camp Geiger that most of the recruits coming up from Paris Island would go through the infantry training there. And then we had brick barracks out at the rifle range when we would attend the rifle range to learn how to fire pistols and rifles and Browning automatic rifles, and the mess halls also were brick facilities. But then again, when you're in the field, sometimes you had to sleep in pup tents. And you had to learn how to make up marching packs, and sometimes that's a little confusing.
And was your training your first experience? Were they what you expected?
Yes. I mean, I'd heard a lot of horror tales from some of the former Marines that I knew, but for the most part, it was good. Just got to roll with the punch.
And if we can move on to your service in Korea now, how did you feel when you found out you were going to Korea?
I think I was pretty excited about going. The whole organization had got activated. It was, I think, in June of 1950. We got orders to report to Camp Pendleton for further training, and then everybody figured they were going to go anyway. And at the time, the Marine Corps was pretty light on staff, and so when they activated the reserves, it kind of helped everybody out. We went out, we left New Orleans by train, and we stopped several places en route to California, and one of them was in Fort Worth, Texas, and my brother was stationed over there at one of the air bases, and came out to the train to meet us and brought us a bunch of food. So it was nice. And he was still in the Air Force at the time. But we got out to Camp Pendleton, and they brought the train right into the base, and everybody got off, and they got aboard cattle cars and moved over to the barracks where we were going to be billeted. And from there, most of the people got assignments. Some of them went to various locations there on the base where they had normally had regular Marines serving in there. They put the reserves in there to do those functions. I had gotten transferred out to a place called Tent Camp 2, and out there we were training. We had rifle ranges and mortar ranges and all kind of firing ranges out there to get ready to meet what we were going to meet. And we lived in Quonset huts, and they would have a butler building or so for a mess hall, and it was pretty primitive out there at the time. And a lot of wild animals still running around, mountain lions all over. You could hear them howling at night because the government let the sheep ranches come in to graze in some of the ranges out there. Well, the lions liked the sheep pretty well. And we had ammo dumps out there, and I worked in operations at the time. And we used that to provide ammunition for all the ranges for the Marines that were going to fire. And one thing I can recall, one time they were making the movie The Flying Leathernecks with John Wayne. And this was down in around the 14 area, I believe. And we got to go down there and watch some of the shootings, and it was pretty exciting. And I had a Marine friend of mine who was a technical sergeant, ran the motor pool for those folks, so he'd come down and pick us up and take us down, and it was pretty nice. And sometimes in the evening, they would have some entertainment come in from Hollywood or something. I recall meeting Charlie McCarthy and Edgar Bergen, and I had some pictures taken with them, but all the pictures and stuff that I had went down with Hurricane Katrina when our house was destroyed. So it didn't have much stuff to show you. But then they were forming up drafts to leave Camp Pendleton to head to Korea. And one of the kids that I went out with, he got deployed as soon as we got out there, and before I got ready to come back, he had been killed. And he was the first casualty I think we had from that battalion that was from New Orleans. Now, I had an uncle who was the first Army person to be killed in Korea. He was a master sergeant. His name was Bill Darrow. And his mother and grandmother, he was taking care of them, so that was a pretty sad moment for us. But I finally got assigned to a transfer training battalion, and at the time I was, my rank was staff sergeant then, and I was a platoon sergeant and then took over as a company gunnery sergeant. And then we deployed, I think it was in June of 1951, out of San Diego aboard the USS Breckenridge. And that was about 18 days of horror on that ship. We ran into a storm. Everybody was seasick. You couldn't stand up to eat. The food would just run down one side when the ship. It was a nightmare. But we wound up in Japan, and we went into Kobe, and they took all our clothes. We had all our clothes and stuff with us. They took all our sea bags to put them in storage for when we were on our way back. Or if we had to be hospitalized, you'd have uniforms in Japan. But it was kind of funny when we got into the port. They had a rule that nobody could get off unless they were in groups of 25. And everybody was looking for the nearest bar or the nearest house to get service. And the place stunk terribly. They had open benjos, and I mean, it was pretty bad. But you can imagine 25 Marines trying to get in a small place that had paper doors and windows, and a few drinks, the doors were down. But anyway, that was a rule. So we got into, we went back aboard ship and went into Busan. And from Busan, they trucked us up to around the Punch Bowl area where I was assigned. My unit was going to be the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, 1st Marine Division. And the first night we got in there, they had us bivouac on the river. Everybody put up their shelter halves and was sleeping, and about the middle of the night, this tremendous roar was coming down, and there was a flash flood coming. And that river came up so fast, and everybody grabbing whatever stuff they could grab and started heading up the hill. Well, that lasted a couple hours. And then the next morning, we had folks come down from wherever the units were bivouacked to pick us up as replacements. Well, we were in an area around Hill 881, which was near the Punch Bowl. And we had moved up on this hill to relieve another company that was up there. And about on it was about the 19th, in the middle of the night, we could see the Koreans moving up. We could see lights coming up from down the ridge, and we knew we were going to get attacked. And about that time, they started dropping mortars on us. But we were all dug in. We had places all dug in, and we were ready for them. But going up that hill, I lost at least 2 lieutenants were wounded and evacuated. And when they evacuated you, they used the Korean Transportation Corps. Guys that carried ammo up the hill and supplies up the hill, they would evacuate those folks back there. And we had that morning of the 19th or the 20th, we got hit pretty bad. And one of the kids that I knew pretty well from Vivian, Louisiana here, I couldn't find. And I finally looked down in the hole, and a mortar had hit him right on, so he never knew what hit him, I'm sure. But I went up the hill with about 49 in my platoon, and we had about 9 that came down that had something wrong with them. And then we got relieved by Dog Company, which was in our battalion, and we had a gunnery sergeant by the name of Wazowski, Warkowski, got the Medal of Honor for that operation up there. And the next day we were catching incoming all day, and I had received some shrapnel in my leg, but it wasn't bad enough to get evacuated anyway. They took me back to the aid station, and they indicated that I had been wounded and not evacuated. So I brought that copy to show you. So about that time, when they write that tag, it notifies Headquarters Marine Corps that they have to send a telegram to the next of kin. So my mother got this thing that I had been wounded. And I had been writing every day and trying to get mail and everything out. And I wish they hadn't have done that, because I knew she'd gone through this before with my older brother. And but anyway, I didn't get evacuated. I went to the aid station, got treated, and I went back to work. And a couple months after that, I got reassigned within the battalion, because they needed someone who could type. And we had all these letters of condolence that had to go out, and the battalion commanders had to sign them. And but I could type. That was a good thing that I had learned that skill. And we had finally moved off of that hill. We went into another area that the South Koreans had lived in, and their health habits were not very good. They defecated wherever they were standing or sitting, and we moved in this area, and I mean, it was nasty to have to do that. And the weather had started to turn cold then, and we were still wearing our combat boots and leggings. We never had the new rubber boots, the thermal boots they call them, and the nice thick socks. But when we got them, I mean, it was a real blessing. At least your feet could get warm. We normally had to sleep with 2 sleeping bags. We didn't have any winter bags at the time, so we'd get 2 summer bags. And the hygiene was pretty bad at times. I can recall that we were up on the hill for about 45 days without a shower. And then they came in and they set up a shower unit, and you walked in one end and dropped all your clothes down, and then you went in and took a shower, and the water just falling off you like wax. And you come out the other end and fresh clothes for you. And that made you feel good too. And then the weather really started to turn cold, and nobody would want to get out to go to the facilities because it was so damn cold, you know. But somehow or another we survived. Anyway, sometime in January, I guess it was, I got selected by the 5th Marines, and they took 1 Marine out of the 7th Marines to go back to Japan. And it was kind of a PR trip. And it was done for Acme Newsreel, and I think Acme is out of business now. But they took us into Tokyo and put us up in a nice hotel, and then we see geisha girls, and we went to the Imperial Palace. And then when we got finished, we went to a place called Camp Otsu, was in Japan. And it was a rest area for the guys that had been wounded and coming back, and then going either back in the country or going back to the States. And I went back in country, and I mean, the weather was just awful, you know. Being a southern boy, we never had snow like that. But when I got back, we had orders to come back to the States, and they put us aboard ship. Well, most of the Marines were having problems with worms from the sea rations and stuff that they would eat. And the corpsmen that were on board ship wanted to get a specimen from all the Marines so they could check to see whether they had worms. That's the funniest damn thing you ever saw. They give you a Dixie cup, and they say, we want you to produce. Some guy said, I can't do that. You want to let me use yours. And then he got all these guys lined up around the ship with these Dixie cups full of crap. almost everybody had worms. And when they got to San Diego, they put them in the barracks down and start feeding them these big pills. And no one could go home or on leave until they got cleared. But, I mean, there was some funny moments in there, but there was some pretty sad moments too. When I got back to San Diego, I went home on leave, and my enlistment was about up. So I decided to re-enlist, and they kept me right there in New Orleans for, I think it was about a year or so. And then I got transferred over to Cherry Point, North Carolina, which was an aviation operation. Well, since I had an infantry and an administrative MOS, they put me in operations in the air wing. And I was responsible for training and stuff for the people in the squadron. During the period of time that I was with the 2nd Marine Aircraft Wing, I was training to be an NBC operator, nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare. And about this time, the Army was getting ready to have a shot with nuclear and atomic program out in Desert Rock, Nevada. And they had selected 10 Marines to go out and monitor some of the Army shots. So before we did that, we went down to Camp Lejeune and went through some training down there, reviewed all the stuff that happened at Nagasaki and Hiroshima, learned how to use Geiger counters and pocket dosimeters and the stuff that would probably help us keep us alive. Didn't really see any new equipment or anything. They just give you a poncho and your helmet and the clothes you had on your back. And if you got exposed, they'd have a broom you could brush yourself down, or a shower unit. But anyway, we got out, it was sometime in June. We flew out to Camp Pendleton. And out at one of the camps at Camp Pendleton, they had set up a training area down there. They'd been dug trenches and stuff. And it was going to simulate what we were going to be doing at the shots that we were going to participate in. Anyway, we stayed there a few days, and then we flew out to the Air Force Base there in Nevada. And then we were bussed out to Frenchman Flats, and we lived in tents while we were waiting to participate in this atomic exercise. We got out there for the Army shot, and it was called Priscilla, and I think it was a 37 KT bomb, which was more than they had at Hiroshima and at Nagasaki. And the observers were about 1,000 yards from ground zero. People 10 miles back in these bunkers, when they got ready to shoot, they had them turn around, and most of them got exposed to radiation on their neck and sunburned. And we were down in the trenches, and they had microphones set up so you could hear everything that was going on back at where they were going to detonate this explosion. And the count went down, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and they said, "Get down on your knees and cover your eyes." Well, when it went off, it was like an earthquake. The earth started moving up, and all of a sudden, it was a big explosion. But at that same time, I could see every bone in my arm, like it x-rayed you. And we looked up, and the sky had just filled with all different colors of the rainbow, purples, reds, oranges, and the dirt was flying up in the air. Well, they had placed some animals. They had a place out there they called the Port Sheridan Hotel, where they housed all these animals for experimentation. And where we had seen animals before, there wasn't any animals. So they got us up a while, and then we went in and took some readings on our Geiger counters, and then came back in. And we got debriefed ourselves and got cleaned up. And then the Marine Corps sent a battalion from Camp Pendleton, and it was my old outfit, the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. They were part of the 4th Atomic Exercise Brigade. And they had gone in and placed every piece of equipment that the Marine Corps owned: tanks, trucks, jeeps, telephones, cooking utensils. And this shot was going to take place in the middle of the night, because in the desert it was almost 110, 112 every day. And we'd go out at night, and at least it was cool then. And we got down and the shot was ready to go. This was supposed to be a shot called a hood. No, it was going to be Diablo was the one. Well, they started the countdown, and we had observed a couple days before all the equipment and stuff that was where it was and where it was being set up. But they started the countdown, and it went down 10 to 1. Nothing happened. And they counted down again. Nothing happened, and then the guy says, "Put emergency evacuation plan into effect immediately." Well, they had about 3,000 troops out there in the field with a live bomb sitting out there. What had happened was that when they were placing all this stuff, they severed a power line that was to set this thing off. So they got everybody out safely, and then they rescheduled this other shot. And this shot was called Hood. It was a 74 KT bomb, larger than anything that had been exploded before. Well, we got down into the trenches and everything, and we had the same experience as we had before. But when we got out, they were letting the troops go up to certain areas, and there were people taking readings with the Geiger counters and stuff. And that was in July sometime. The first one was in June, and then in July. And between those shots, they had decided to take all the Marines into Las Vegas and give them a treat on town. So they brought these buses out, and everybody got in, and they had khaki uniforms and the sea bags, and they looked terrible, you know. But everybody had to dress up and get in their uniform. And we went down to Las Vegas, and the people they treated us great. We went to see shows, and they gave us money to gamble with and food to eat, and it was nice. So then we came back, and then we returned to our base at Cherry Point, not Cherry Point, but at Cherry Point. We went back to Cherry Point. Well, when I got back, they had sent me to an administrative chief school at Parris Island. I completed that school, got back to Parris Island, and they had orders for me to go to drill instructor school. So I went back down to drill instructor school, and I graduated in, I think it was December '57. And I got assigned to Parris Island as a drill instructor. And I was assigned to the 2nd Battalion, and we moved over to the 3rd Battalion. And then from there, I was selected to go to the Special Training Unit at Parris Island, and this was for kids who were slow learners. We had one platoon, and that was called the Proficiency Platoon. And we had a Strength Platoon out there. The kids were lacking in physical skills or were overweight, and also had a Motivation Platoon for kind of recalcitrant kids. And we got those kids when they were in about their 21st training day, and then we kept them for a week or two out there and tested them and reinforced the stuff that they weren't getting, rather than discharge them, because most of the kids were pretty good, just a little slow on the draw. And when I left there, I got selected to go to recruiter school at Parris Island. And I completed recruiter school, and I got assigned up to the northwest part of the states in Portland, Oregon. And I was assigned as the station sergeant major. And we had all of the state of Oregon and southern Washington as our territory to recruit. And we had about 30 Marines that were recruiters in that area. And meanwhile, I had been nominated to participate in the limited duty officer program. They had about 3,000 applications that they submitted, and they only selected 30. And I was one of the 30. And I was commissioned a second lieutenant, and 10 days later, I was in Japan. And I was with the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing now. And I spent about 14 months, I think, in Japan. And then I came back and I was assigned as a Marine Corps liaison officer at the Federal Records Center in St. Louis, Missouri. And I went there as a second lieutenant and left as a captain. 3 years I was there. That was probably one of the most interesting tours that I've had. We had all of the service records from everyone that had ever served in the Marine Corps. The hard record, the hard personnel records, and their medical records. And all of this stuff was on file, and they had about 14 different filing systems that they used to find the information they were looking for. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had 14 agents assigned out there because they would verify records for security clearances for everyone. All of the investigative agencies of the other armed forces had investigated. The ONI was out there, OSI was out there, the Army CID was out there. And I was responsible for all of the Marine Corps records. At one time we had about 15 Marines stationed there, and we had about 2,200 civilian employees working there. So I also had to be the liaison between headquarters Marine Corps and the Records Center in transferring records that they needed in Washington to take action on things. During that period of time, we had an incident of a young man by the name of Charles Whitman, who was a student at the University of Texas in Austin, gotten up in the tower and shot up a bunch of people. And they finally killed him and brought him down, and the autopsy they found that he had a tumor on his brain. Another incident that I can recall, and I'll never forget, was that when President Kennedy was assassinated, they were looking for a young man by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald, who was a former Marine, and he was also from New Orleans. And his records had been up before the Bad Conduct Discharge Board to see if they would change it. And I got a call from headquarters Marine Corps and said, find the record, don't give it to anybody. We got an airplane coming out to pick up the records, and there's an Air Force major going to be flying into Belleville, and you have to take that record over there. Well, the record had just got in the back. It was in the back of a truck on the way in, and I got it, and I let headquarters Marine Corps know. And I mean, I bet you every one of those agents was in there wanting to look at the record. Sorry about that, guys. But that evening, we got a call that they wanted the medical records also. So we had a Navy commander who was a Marine Corps liaison officer when I wasn't there, and I was a Naval liaison officer when he wasn't there. And so we got those records and brought them on over, and I had receipts for both of those records that went down with the hurricane too. And another interesting thing that happened, one evening we were having a function at the Army Club, and I got a call from the FBI office wanting to know if I could meet with them. They had 5 former Marines involved in an incident down in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and that they needed to review the records, but they needed to take them downtown St. Louis. And they said, we know you've got to come with them, so we're asking for your help. So I went up, we retrieved the records, and I spent the evening with the FBI, and we finally got the records back, but they were all in secure files anyway then. And we had lots of congressmen and senators and stuff that we didn't want to have out in the open file, so it was all in this big vault. And when I left there, I had orders to go to Vietnam. And I had just been promoted to captain. And when I got to Okinawa, I was supposed to go to the 1st Battalion, 9th Marines. And I got sidetracked to be the personnel officer for Camp Butler, which was the transferring agent between Vietnam and Japan, and it was a kind of a rest stop for the guys coming out of the country. And we had a big Army hospital there that they were coming into, and Kadena Air Force Base was there also. But so I wound up being a personnel officer, and all my friends they were moving on. They'd go up to Camp Hansen for further training and then on in the country. Well, I finally got to go in the country because my next assignment was going to be the funeral director for the Marine Corps. And they wanted me to get over and see what the morgue was like and how they were doing with identifying remains. And it wasn't a very pleasant trip, but I got assigned to Headquarters Marine Corps as the assistant head of the casualty section and the funeral director for the Marine Corps. And we worked about 18 hours every day because we had to make personal notification on every wounded and dead Marine, and it was all handled in that casualty section. In addition to that, we had to handle all the funerals that were taking place in Arlington and the services over at Fort Myers Chapel. I had 2 mortuary sections, one in California and one in Dover, Delaware. And remains for everybody on the East Coast would go to Dover, Delaware, and everybody on the west side of the river would go to Treasure Island. We had about 40 Marines assigned to escort duty, and each one in Philadelphia and at Treasure Island. And the Marine Corps would have to make notification to the next of kin, and that message had to be delivered by Marines in the field from the inspector instructor staff of all the reserve units or the nearest Marine unit that was there. And they had to call us back within 4 hours after they made notification. And then we would make arrangements to bring 3 members of the family if they were coming to Washington, or make arrangements for the honor guard, whatever, everything else. Meanwhile, the remains were in Dover, Delaware, and on the other coast. And we would have a new set of dress blues prepared for them with all their medals and decorations, and then we had to start the benefit section of who gets the money and about arranging honors out in the field for them. And it was a tough job, believe me. Having to make personal notification on the families. And I can recall one time I had about 6 new kids coming into the unit, and we wanted to make sure that they understood what they were dealing with. So we would get the picture of the deceased and take a copy of it with us, and we'd go up to Dover, Delaware, since it was about an 1.5-hour ride, and take them through the mortuary. And I can recall this huge gunnery sergeant by the name of Henrique came in, and we had a body that was in a transfer case that was going to be a non-viewable remains. And we were having a problem getting the transfer case open, so I asked him, I said, go down there on that end, and you lift on that end, and I'll get on that end. Well, about the time he lifted that thing up, a fly come off out of the casket or the transfer case and flew in his mouth. Oh, he was sick. That was the end of his trip for us. But we had to make sure that these kids, the identification was done properly, and they used fingerprints, they used dental work, and the worst kind of identification was one of their Marines, former fellow Marines, who went in to identify him. They wouldn't even look at it. Yeah, that's him. But that wasn't any good. We had to have at least two. I have been spit on, punched at, had the flag thrown in my face when I attend some of these funerals. And the people just, they want to take out their hostility against someone, and you represent what took their son away. But we also handled a number of remains outside of the United States. And I've been to Ireland and to England and to Germany and to Austria and Mexico. And these kids come in and they join as foreign nationals. And I can recall one, we got a call from Vietnam that they had sent this remains back. This kid was from Austria. And they didn't believe in repatriation of the dead. You got killed, that's where you laid. But this kid was going into Dover. So my boss said, you need to go on this one. He said, the kid was in the Austrian army, and they had a good bit of communist activity in the area. And his mother and father were pretty old. So I got all of his medals, and I got all of his money that was coming to him, and money for the insurance for the parents. And they lived in a little village called Villach in Austria. And I went up to Dover, got him all prepared. He was a viewable remain, and took off the Philadelphia airport. When we got to the airport, we were putting him up the ramp to get to the bottom of the plane, and he slips off the ramp, and he popped out of the box. So we got him stuck in, his nose was broke. So we took off, went back to Dover, got him fixed up, and took off again. I went to Frankfurt with him, and they checked him all over. And they had a hearse there for me, along with an interpreter. The interpreter's name was Hans, and he was a POW during World War II. And had come to the United States. They had him over in Oklahoma. And he and I took off in the car, and then they had a driver with the hearse. And it was about an 8-hour drive from Vienna. And when we got there, it was snowing, and the funeral home was shut. There was nobody there. So I said, yeah, I'm not going to sleep with this body here tonight. So we walked all around the funeral home, and there was a cleaning lady in there. And she said, you can park out there. No one's going to bother us. So we got up the next morning, and we had a hotel reservation down there. And there was an old lady sitting on the bench out near the funeral home. And I told Hannah, I said, that's got to be that kid's mother. Who's going to be sitting out here this time of morning, cold? So we stopped, and we talked with her. And sure enough, it was so I told her, I said, well, we need to speak to the funeral director, and we'll let you see the remains because it is going to be viewable. But we need to get a hold of your husband also. So we got in, and the funeral director was there. He said, I'll have it all fixed up. Well, they have a viewing room. You walk down the hall, and all the caskets are sitting up. And they had him all dressed up in these blues and everything. And it looked nice. So we told her that we needed to go find the dad. So we get in the car and driving down the street, and here comes a little old man on a bicycle. And it was him. So we stopped him and we asked him to, let's go to the house. Well, they were staying with the kid's aunt and uncle. So we got there, and the aunt could speak a little English, but she was hostile. And I could feel she was going to take it out on me, so I said, we'll get along all right, I'm sure. So my interpreter says, be careful what you say here, he said, because there's a lot of communists in this town, and I'm sure that the newspaper people are going to come. Well, we had already sent a letter to them telling them exactly what had happened to them. And I said, I'm not going to tell them anything different than what we said. So we get into the house, and everything was going along fine. And here comes a newspaper guy. And I asked him, I said, do you want me to talk to him? And they said, yes, we would appreciate that. Well, the guy wrote a nice article. And by the time I got back to England, they had already had the article down that I had to debrief out of England. And we talked about, I gave them the medals and the money, and it's more money than they'd ever had in their life. And they were going to have services at the Catholic Church. But we went over to see the priest, and he was blind. He had 2 altar boys was carrying him around. They had no pews in the church, but out in the graveyard, they had been working on that grave for about a week because everything was frozen. And I said, are we going to have any pallbearers? And they said, yes, we would. So I said, I'd like to at least teach them how to fold the flag before we get out there. So then I had to buy flowers on behalf of the Marine Corps, and I think we spent $50, and God, it was just a huge arrangement of flowers. Then we all set for the funeral. We go to the church and head for the funeral home. I mean, for the graveyard. And all of his friends who had been in the Army, I mean, they had a big crowd show up there. And I was starting to get chilled, and I know they were too. And I had an overcoat on. They wouldn't let me wear my uniform. I was in civilian clothes. And I had taken a couple pictures also that we lost in the hurricane. But I told the mother, I said, I think we ought to be going back so you guys can get some rest. So they said, oh no, we're going down to the Bach house, and we're going to have a little food and some drink. So we said, okay. So that's where we went. I said, we got it in, they had this huge Venus schnitzels and German potato salad and lots of beer. And it went on and it went on. And he had a young sister whose husband was a truck driver, who was one of the pallbearers. And they said, look, this job that you got is not a very pleasant one, and we want you to enjoy the village while you're here. And we got some of the younger folks here want to take you around. Well, I was already half in the bag. I did not remember getting back at the hotel, but the next morning I had lost my voice completely. And I told the interpreter, I said, we need to get back to Vienna. So I got over there, and I mean, we had a nice time. Everybody just treated me great. And I guess they were having a break in school, and all the kids had their skis, and they were walking down the street. It was interesting. So anyway, we get back to Vienna, and I went to the Marine House and had a doctor over there at the embassy give me a shot, said you need to get some sleep. So then the Marine says, oh, you got to come to the Marine House tonight. We're having a party over there. We don't have many Marine officers visit us. So I went over there, and who did I run into? With one of my former neighbors from Camp Pendleton. His son was a Marine on embassy duty there. So we really had a nice visit. And they had taken me all around Vienna to show me the sights and everything. So the next day I got up and I went to England and debriefed, and then flew back into. We got a very nice letter from the family. They translated and everything. And but that was probably the hardest tour of duty that I had.
And did I remember you told me how many remains came back? Was it in July?
In July, we had about 10,000 dead Marines. And there were a lot of kids that got ambushed, and the enemy would come back in and they switched their dog tags all around. So you didn't know who they were. In 3 days, those bodies were starting to deteriorate out in that weather. But that was just not a very good experience. And so when I left headquarters of the Marine Corps, I went back and I went into Vietnam. And I got to serve again with the 1st Marine Division, but this time I had been promoted to major, and I got assigned to the G1 at the headquarters. And one of the duties they gave me were running the clubs. We had quite a few staff NCO clubs and officers clubs all around the area, and we used to have to fly in there and check them out. At that time, they had slot machines in all of those clubs. And the word came down from up above that they had to go. So I was responsible for making sure we had a good inventory of all the slugs and the equipment. And I made arrangements with an Army helicopter unit that carried big, heavy grains of stuff. And we loaded them up in 6x6s and took them down to the airfield and put them in cargo nets. And I was sitting up in the front of this helicopter, and we flew out over the ocean in the China Sea and dropped them. And that was something to see. When I came back from Vietnam, I was assigned to 2nd Marine Division, Camp Lejeune, and I was a division adjutant there until I retired. And that was a nice experience there too. But we were having tremendous drug problems during that time, and I was one of the drug control officers there. And I can remember separating about 100 kids for marijuana. We started using dogs in the barracks when they come back from deployment to sniff out the drugs. And it wasn't a very pleasant time for the Marine Corps. And then they started mandatory tests on urine samples and stuff. And that helped a lot, but they still got a problem. I mean, everybody's got that problem. And I retired, and I went to work for a company in Atlanta, Georgia, called Orchid Exterminating Company. It's a pest control company. And I stayed with them for about 8 years, and then one of the guys that was the vice president there moved over to Terminex, which is an international company, and asked me to go with him. And I left there and I went back to San Diego, and I stayed on for another 20-something years and retired. But I worked in the Far East with the Japanese, with the Indonesians, with the Chinese at Taiwan, and was teaching them how to manage a branch and also how to control pests. And they got as many as we got here in the United States. And then I retired again. And really never had much problems health-wise until after I retired. And I had been exposed to radiation from the shots out in Nevada. I'd been exposed to Agent Orange a couple times while I was in Vietnam. And I wound up getting colon cancer, kidney cancer, prostate cancer, all unconnected. Then I had a quadruple bypass, and I had 5 incisional hernias repaired. And the VA here at Overton Brooks found me with peripheral neuropathy and also peripheral arterial disease. And when I went to see my doctor, he says, "Why are you still with us?" So, and I'm still having some problems. But I do work with the Military Order of the Purple Heart. I'm the past commander here in Shreveport, and I've been the adjutant just about when I got here. And I also work with the Marine Corps League. Now, what brought me to Shreveport? Well, after I retired from Terminex, I went back to Louisiana and moved in on a lake in Slidell, Louisiana. And here comes Hurricane Katrina with a 27-foot surge hitting my house. And we lost everything we had in there, including all the memorabilia and the pictures and medals and personnel records, and so it's been a rough time. Meanwhile, I found out that the Justice Department was offering $75,000 to people who had been exposed to radiation out in the desert. And I went online, looked it up, and they had applications and everything there that could be used to see if you could get it. And but I had to go back to the state of Nevada, who had kept records on people who had been exposed to radiation by Geiger counters and by dosimeters, and they sent me back a certification that I had been there and indicated that the 4th Marine Exercise Brigade was out there. And then I had to have birth certificates, which were all lost, marriage certificates, all kinds of stuff. When I got it finished, they came back with one thing, says, well, we need this doctor to certify your cancer out in California. And he said, that looks like it's going to be it. Well, I called out there, and in 2 days I had it, and yeah, I had a check in my account, which was real nice. So, and I've been real pleased with the treatment that I've received here in the VA. And I do volunteer work here at the VA 2 days a week, and also at the War Veterans Home in Bossier City, Louisiana.
And do you think your experiences in the Marines and your military experience, do you think there are things that you learned then that you took on to your subsequent career as a consultant?
I'm sure that I did, because the subsequent jobs that I had works just like the military. You have a motor transport section you got to run, you got personnel you got to hire, people you got to fire, training that you got to perform, and all of that experience that I had just gives you a lot of self-confidence in what you're doing.
Could you tell me a little bit more about your Purple Heart?
I got involved with the rocket mortars coming in on us, and at first I didn't even realize that I'd been hit, because the adrenaline was going and going, and next thing I know, I'm down to the aid station, and I'm just glad I'm still breathing.
Well, I think that covers everything we were planning to talk about today. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about that we haven't mentioned?
Sure. I wanted to tell you about my oldest brother, who was my real hero. He joined the Army Air Corps back around 39, I think, and trained as a bombardier and worked with B-25s. And here comes the Pearl Harbor attack on the 7th of December, and the president wants something to happen to the Japanese, and he wanted something quick, and he called in all of his chiefs of staff and said, we got to come up with something. Well, there was a Navy captain who was flying across country going to Norfolk, Virginia, that was in on trying to figure out what was happening. So he sees all these landing fields going across country and decided that we could probably put a bomber on an aircraft carrier and return some of their courtesy. And so he goes back and he talks to Hap Arnold and the Navy people back there, and they brought in Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle, because he was an expert in all those aircraft. And they asked him if he thought it would work, and he said, yeah, I think so. We might have to make some modifications. So then he went out to ask for volunteers. And my brother was stationed out in Oregon at the time, and they never told him what the thing was, but they may not come back. And he said, if you want to change your mind, please do so. Anyway, they went down to Eglin Field in Florida, and they started training on shortwave runways the length of the airfield. And my mother got a call that she could come over and visit. So she went over to Eglin Field to see him. And they still didn't know where they were going, but they were going on a mission. And the next thing we know is that Tokyo is bombed. We didn't know what it was all about until we got a letter from General Doolittle. And he said that he had seen my brother and he was okay, but we really didn't know. And the story was that they flew off a vessel called Shangri-La. Shangri-La was the Hornet. And that was supposed to take off 400 miles from the coast, and they got spotted by a Japanese fishing vessel about 700 miles, and they figured that that was a picket, and the admiral says, "You got to go now." He says, "We can't afford to lose any more carriers," because they were supposed to be going to pick up some Marines to go to Guadalcanal. Anyway, they took off, and he was in flight crew number 13, and his pilot's name was McElroy, and I forget the other's name, but I brought you a book so you can look at it. And they took off, and their target was Yokosuka, the naval station at Yokosuka. And they hit the target at Yokosuka, and there was an aircraft carrier in dry dock that they dropped bombs on, and they had pictures, the only one that took pictures in that flight, and they got out of it with them. Anyway, they headed back over towards the Chinese coast. The plan was to fly to China and turn over the airplanes to General Chennault and Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek to be used against the Japanese. Well, since they had to take off so early, they run out of gas, and then they hit a storm. Well, fortunately, they got over the mainland of China, but the gas was gone. So they bailed out in the middle of the night. And he landed in a rice paddy. And he had his 45 on him, and he had a Chinese emblem or something on his jacket, Chinese-American thing. Anyway, they was landing in Japanese-held territory. But the guerrillas were in the territory too. And they took him out. And they finally got him into Chongqing, where the Generalissimo was. They had a little reunion there. And he went over to Burma and flew 52 missions in B-25s from Burma before he ever got to come home. And after they got home, General Doolittle, he got the Congressional Medal of Honor, and all the rest of the crew got the next Distinguished Flying Cross. And but they had a reunion every year on April the 18th. And they're only down to about 7 members now. My brother is got a display in the D-Day Museum in New Orleans, and his flight jacket is in there, and letters to home, and a nice picture of him. And he was a sergeant at the time, and he got promoted to flight officer before he retired. And I had spent a lot of time with them as a kid. After he got married, and he was stationed at Keesler Air Force Base. I used to ride the train over there and see him. But he was a real hero. But he loved the Marine Corps too. And it was kind of fun.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for talking to me today. And unless there's anything else you'd like to cover, we can draw
I don't
that to a
think
close.
so.
Okay, thanks very much.